Hallo, ek is Hannes van die Brain Fund en ons is in Philadelphia in Family Hope Center se kantoor saam met meneer Matthew Newell waar ons met julle gaan gesels oor breinbesering en hoe ons ouers wil help. Ek stel aan julle voor Matthew Newell.
Welcome to our presentation where hope comes home. We look forward to you joining us.
Skakel in by ons bemagtigingsprogram vir spesiale behoeftige gesinne. Kennis is krag. Hallo, ek is Hannes van die Brain Fund en ons is in Philadelphia in Family Hope Center se kantoor saam met meneer Matthew Newell waar ons met julle gaan gesels oor breinbesering en hoe ons ouers wil help. Ek stel aan julle voor Matthew Newell.
Welcome to our presentation where hope comes home. We look forward to you joining us. In vandag se episode gaan ons gesels met Matthew Newell oor die brein. Nou vir die meeste van ons en veral vir my is die brein so 'n komplekse plek. Mense swat jare en dan sê hulle verstaan dit nie. Hoe gaan ek as 'n pappa my eie brein en my kind se brein en my vrou se brein verstaan? Vertel ons bietjie van die brein, Matthew. Geef ons 10 fun facts about the brain.
Well, thank you for asking that, because I've been working with the brain for 35 years, Hans, and I find it where they say sometimes where the more you spend with somebody or the more you spend on something, the more bored you get with it. Well, in fact, the more I spend time on the brain, the more amazing it becomes for me, the more exciting it becomes. So this brain, for the average person, weighs about 2% of their total body weight. But the brain uses up to 20% of the energy that you feed yourself every day. And of course, we're going to talk about nutrition in the future, about how that's so important for the brain. So imagine only 2%, but uses up to 20% of your energy. Some scientists have tried to say, well, if we made a supercomputer that could do what the brain could do, it would use 10 megawatts of energy just to run the brain. 10 megawatts of energy would be like a small hydro power plant. I mean, can you imagine a small hydro power plant packed into something that's just 2 pounds and how magnificent that is, with the explosions that are going on every minute going on inside this brain? The brain has 1 trillion neurons, 100 billion functioning neurons, all packed in, and it's one of these organs that the more you put in the brain, the more it can hold. That's amazing. The more you stimulate it, the more it's capable of being stimulated. So I'm excited about this 2 pounds of energy there. This 2 pounds of a power plant that when it's well, it's magnificent. When it gets hurt, it can be repaired. And I think that what I'm excited about in the years that I've spent working parents from over 35 countries is that no matter how hurt the brain is, the principles of neuroplasticity, the principles of growing the brain and developing the brain come into play. And so we're here talking about how magnificent this is and how it can be repaired and supported and developed and challenged and yeah, that's all great stuff. And you know, the consistency of the brain is kind of like butter, which is amazing.
Wow.
And if you were to spread out the brain, it would be like a newspaper. And so it doesn't look like a lot, and it doesn't seem to be working. You know, if you take individual parts out, but it's one of those organs that's more than the sum of its parts. Kind of like a team. Each individual player on a team doesn't seem to be significant, but when you put them together, you have this exponential value going on in the brain. And to be fair, most of us don't really understand, well, how does that neurotransmitter affect that neurotransmitter? How one particular neuron can fire up 100. I mean, you think about it, within the brain itself, just in the neocortex, which is a quarter inch, there's 57,000 miles of wiring just in the neocortex itself. And that's just the part of the brain that helps you to think. But the whole rest of the brain, all this down here, the white matter of the brain, it's over 1 million miles of wiring interconnecting to help you process data so that you could feed it to the upper part, which is like your computer. So this would be like your hard drive down here, and this would be where you do all your Microsoft PowerPoint, all your Microsoft Word, all the things that you want to have up on your desktop is right here at the top part of the brain, and all the hard drive is down here. So that's 1 million miles. So how can we affect that 1 million miles? How could we create it? How could we develop it? How could we maintain it? And that's what we're here talking about with parents, you know? It could be an exciting journey just to understand the well brain, but it's even more exciting, how can we help our children as opposed to be paralyzed by fear that we don't understand the brain well enough to change it? Well, we're here talking about that today.
Wow. Dit is ongelooflik. Al die feite. Tell me, Matthew, if how you learn about the brain, the creator who designed all of this, like, what's your thoughts? The more you explore this, like, how genius is that?
Well, it's incredibly complex, but in some ways, it's incredibly simple. I mean, Albert Einstein once had a quote where he said that if you can't explain it simply enough, then you really don't understand it, right? So, in some ways, what we do with our parents and our parent training, and doctors come from all over the world, neuroscientists come and sit in our seminars, parents come, who are our favorite audience, obviously, come and sit in our seminar to learn about the brain, because it matters to them that if we can somehow master what this does, we can affect our family.
Yeah.
And by affecting our family, we can affect that child who can't see, who is blind, who can't see, who can't walk, who has epileptic seizures, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cerebral palsy, autism, ADD, ADHD. How can we affect this? And how can we take a miracle and how could we manage that to support, the family and of course support the child that we're trying to heal? So the brain is divided into many different parts, which, I'd love to be able to share with your audience. Absolutely. So that we can break it down and say, well, this part does this, and this part of the brain does this, and this part of the brain does this. Yeah. And I'd like to do that. Would that be okay with you?
Absolutely.
If we have some time to do that.
Ja, vertel my meer hoe die brein werk en wat se gedeeltes pas waarin en wat is hulle funksies.
Okay, excellent. So the first part of the brain is this part right down here on us, this medulla oblongata, this little part that comes out of the base of my brain, goes all the way down my spinal cord, and that's called the medulla oblongata. Most people have never heard of that word, medulla. What is that, right? But housed in this part of the brain is all your primary reflexes. The reflex of your eyes to constrict, to have a grit. If everybody in the audience just made a fist, like we do this at our seminar, you made a fist. Yeah. Some people make a fist like this, honest. Some people make a fist like this. Some people make it. But did you know that the actual reflex is to do this? That this is normal reflex? Well, if you knew that, and your child's hand was this, or your child's hand was this, you could actually program in the brain that reflex, just like you could program in the visual reflex, the moral reflex. All the 25 different reflexes are down here in the lower part of the brain. And when your brain is well, these reflexes work together. You fall down, your hand comes out to save your life, your head comes up, you balance yourself on your toes. All these reflexes work together like a football team.
Yeah.
But if it's hurt, you have post-traumatic stress disorder, you have anxiety, you have depression, you don't want to play sports, you can't protect yourself, you're touching everybody, you're biting your fingers all day long. This babkin-pumamental, where you're putting your hair in your mouth, your hair in your shirt, and you're punching people, you can't stop touching people, you get really up close to somebody. So, Hannes, if I got really up close to you like this, you would say, wow, that's really weird, but there's a reflex called hand supporting, which keeps me this kind of safe distance. Wow. Children hurt on the autism spectrum or hurt in the lower levels of the brain get so close to people, or when people come close to them, they hurt them. They kind of touch everything, or they pick things up in stores. So this reflex is a very important part of the brain, these reflexes, because if you don't understand it, then you could really assume that your child is disobedient, depressed, hyperactive, poorly coordinated. You know, I have lots of parents who come to me and said, oh, I thought my child's balance was really bad. We did this balance program with horses or whatever. And we find out, oh, the lower levels of the reflexes were out. And if we just heal those or park them in the right place, wow, the brain begins to emerge as organized. So soldiers, post-traumatic stress disorder, they're hurt in medulla oblongata. And as we reintegrate those reflexes, they're calmer people, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is, when you know where someone's hurt, there's a way to restore that.
To restore.
And
That's all
what you
about
do,
restoration and developing, right? Restoration, developing. But you have to understand that. So what we do with our parents and what we do with our professionals is we have a developmental progression chart. And what we do, and this is being published, what we do is we map the entire brain of a child. And we teach this to parents. In our 3-day parent training, like the medulla does this, the pons does this, the midbrain does this, the cortex does this, and what we do is we measure the development of each parts of the brain so that we know exactly what's going on, which parts are happy, which parts are struggling, and then where do we manage, where do we put our time into healing parts of the brain. Because what we've learned over 35 years is that if the brain is not happy, and you can direct your therapeutic protocols to heal that brain, then you're going to succeed. But what we find in our culture is that we medicate that, and we cut that, and we develop strategies to get around that. We develop strategies to get around dyslexia. We develop strategies to get around ADD, ADHD. We develop medications to get around seizures. We develop strategies to get around learning problems. We develop wheelchairs and braces and Botox and baclofen and all these other symptomatic ways to get around. And we find that if we can simply heal the brain, that the symptoms will disappear and the child will get closer and closer to developing like a well child. And that's our role. That's our goal with parents, is to understand these processes. And that's the medulla oblongata. See, I got off track already. Got so excited about this part of the brain. It's one of my favorite parts of the brain, but nobody really knows about it. The next part is this little part down here called the pons. And the pons, it's kind of a small word, but this is probably my favorite part of the brain. Because this is the part of the brain that helps me focus, helps me concentrate. If a lot of noise is going on in my environment, I can completely focus. It's responsible for basic motivation. To get up every day, put a shirt and tie on, want me to color within the lines, build Legos when I'm 3, build a tree house, find a job, manage my life. It helps regulate my behaviors, helps regulate my facial expressions. So the beginning of communication, which we all think about as language, actually begins with the facial expressions, because that precedes language, and that comes from the pons, controlling of my tongue. We have lots of kids who slur their speech, who can't talk long sentences, who can't chew and swallow, who have problems with drooling, have problems with making facial expressions if they're hurt in autism. And what we do is and also it gives you the ability to track your eyes side to side, what you need for reading. And you know what? This part of the brain, the function of this is crawling on your belly, combat crawling. That's magnificent. Babies are born, they're ready to crawl, and if you give babies the opportunity to crawl on their belly, they'll develop this pons. So regulating their behavior, facial expressions, tongue control, tracking with their vision, filtering a lot of noise in their environment, this becomes possible for them. If they don't, then you've got a child who's 3 years old, 5 years old, and we're calling him ADD, ADHD. We're calling he can't calm down. He's moving his body all the time. He can't focus. He can't track. We have all these strategies to teach him to read. And in this regard, we get way off track. And all we want to do is we want to continue the way that God designed this brain. He designed it in a particular level of hierarchical complexity. You get born with your reflexes. You crawl on your belly. You creep on all fours. You walk, and the different levels of the brain will develop according to the mobility abilities of kids. So we want to really honor that and protect that and develop that. And so when we see children and we go through their brain, we know which parts are happy and which parts are not happy, and then we go and we teach the parents, and together we partner with parents. We teach them what they're looking at so they feel empowered by, oh, I understand the brain. I thought it was impossible. No, it's actually quite exciting.
Yes.
And then we work together to develop a comprehensive program with the parents, and we work together so we can rescue this child out of this disorganized state. Wow. That it wasn't his fault, and it wasn't God's fault, and it wasn't your fault as a parent.
Yes.
But once parents realize that they can be effective, then hope comes. Before, it's like, wow, what am I going to do here, right? I don't understand the brain. I don't understand why my child does these things. So that's the pons. I love that part. It's belly crawling. In some kids, you watch them, they can't belly crawl at all. And they've never belly crawled. They've rolled over, they've sat in Johnny Walkers, or they were paralyzed at birth. And what we want to do is retrain, restore those parts of the brain.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very, very, very fascinating. This part of the brain is called the midbrain. Mm-hmm. In this part of the brain, if we took the brain apart here, this is a part of the brain that most people don't talk about either. This is called the midbrain. Just this part right in here called the thalamus and the basal ganglia. And that's the part of the brain that's responsible for processing all your sensory information, putting it all together, and it's also responsible for your ability to regulate your body. So you have coordination, you have convergence of vision, so you can see things, you have depth perception, you have the ability to remember things in a sequence of events. It helps you to remember yesterday, today, tomorrow, inside, outside, around. So all the abstractions of mathematics and problem solving come from this part of the brain. So it's huge in terms of what's necessary to make your life really happy. If your child's brain is happy within these three sequences, your child will be successful. Okay? Sure. That's the amazing part. And it all happens in the first year of life. Because the children are born with their reflexes, they crawl on their belly, and then they creep on their hands and knees. And that exercise that looks so cute for children, like, oh, the little baby's creeping, isn't amazing? Yeah. That is magnificence. Right in front of your eyes, you see children come through the crawling, into creeping, they're rocking back and forth. And if you honor that and you allow the children to just creep all around the house on their hands and knees like a lion, as opposed to picking them up, they will wire this part of the brain, which allows them to be spectacular in sports, great depth perception, good hearing, good ability to problem solve, and it really sets them up for learning in the future. So we really want to, we find with most of our brain injured children who are hurt, ADD, ADHD, dyslexic, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, we find that these parts of the brain, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, are very disorganized. Mm-hmm. And so what we do with our team, as we've talked about, is we measure the level of competency, the level of wellness and we make decisions with this with the parents, and we say, okay, well, if we need some work done here. What do we do on a day-to-day basis that is helpful to the family, and we teach it to the parents, and the parents implement these at home, and we partner with them. And what we find is when we begin to organize parts of the brain, the children become happier, more balanced, more understanding, more ability to focus, better reading, better language, better ability to coordinate their bodies and play sports with their family and with their ride their bike and do all the things that previously they couldn't do. And you know, Hannes, one of the interesting things about this is there's no age limit.
Wow.
There's no age limit.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, most people say, well, how about if just at 6 years old, does the brain stop? Or how about at 12 years old, does the brain stop? Scientists can now show you that even at 90 years old, the brain is still growing, it's still maturing. You and I can affect the brain. In fact, our listeners, we're affecting their brain right now.
Yeah.
They're sitting there going, whoa, I didn't know that about this part of the brain. I didn't know this about this part of the brain. The more you know, the more you can affect it in a healthy way. And that's why we're talking to our parents, and that's why we have our parent training. That's why Child Brain, and that's why your nonprofit organization is bringing us to South Africa, is to show parents that there's a wonderful kind of family way to heal the brain of our children.
Yes. Now, I remember when I went through this process as someone who knew nothing about the brain, how I was empowered and how understanding this a little bit changed the way we look at our children and see our children. And I think in the next couple of episodes, we'll talk about if my child did not creep, if they did not crawl, if they did not do these things. I think we're sparking a lot of questions. En dit is wat maar met ons kinders gebeur het is, ons het nie verstaan hoekom hulle sekere goeders nie kan doen nie, en ons moes leer dat dit is nie so moeilik om dit te herstel nie, en met die hulp van mense wat weet wat hulle doen, om daai inligting oor te dra na ouers toe om dit te verstaan, help dat ons met ons kinders se breine kan restoreer en die verhouding kan restoreer sodat daar vrede in die gesin is, sodat daar hoop is in die toekoms. Thank you, Matthew, for sharing all of this hope with us. It's so inspiring and empowering. We hope to see you guys soon. Ons hoop om julle te sien vir die volgende episode wat ons meer gaan praat oor die brein en hoe dit jou kan empower.
Skakel in by ons bemagtigingsprogram vir spesiale behoeftige gesinne. Kennis is krag.
Vandag gaan ons gesels oor nutrisie en hoe dit voeding, dit wat ons eet en dit wat ons inneem elke dag, hoe beïnvloed dit die brein? Wat se impak het voeding op die brein?
We want to talk about nutrition in a big way, right? Not just food, but how do we use our environment, right? Nutrition and health to the brain for all of us is very, very important. You know, these children need a lot of protein, they need a lot of oils in the morning so that their brain is happy, they can think clearly, their emotions are more balanced, because obviously the emotional parts of your brain are very important for learning. Good nutrition helps to have clean blood. Obviously the blood, carrying the oxygen, but also carrying all the nutritional substrates. The blood can be really healthy, the blood can be really happy, as it were, or it could be toxic. Studies show that sugar actually closes the brain down and causes conflict in the brain, and the neurons actually shrink under the pressure of sugar. The fats that myelinate the brain to make it go faster. The carbohydrates, which will eventually turn into sugar, but high-powered sugar, so to give them the speed. The salt to give them the enzymes necessary to create the biological changes and transitions in the brain. The oils to make the neurotransmitters. We have a very healthy brain, and constipation is just a symptom of digestive inability. The number one thing that happens in the colon is that it sends a signal to the brain to stop the cycle of the brain, and if you stop the motion of the brain, it's like kind of stopping your breathing.